For my granddaughter's 10th birthday, my son's in-laws sent her a cute teddy bear as a gift. At first she was happy. Then she suddenly froze. "Grandpa, what is this?" she asked. I took a closer look and felt my face go pale. I started digging. 3 days later, the police showed up. Blue and red lights strobed against the manicured hedges of the Caldwell estate, turning the white colonial pillars into a crime scene. I stood on the porch, clutching my cane not for support, but to keep my hands from trembling with rage. The neighbors were already out lining the street like vultures waiting for a carcass. They held their phones up, capturing every moment of the disgrace. 2 officers guided my son Brandon toward the patrol car. His head was bowed, but when he saw me, he stopped. His eyes were red and terrified. "Dad," he choked out, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Dad, please tell them. Tell them I didn't know." I looked at him. I looked at the boy I had raised, the man who had stood by silently, while his in-laws stripped me of my dignity piece by piece. I adjusted my glasses and buttoned my coat against the Boston chill. "You knew enough, Brandon," I said, my voice low and steady. "You knew enough to look the other way." They shoved him into the back seat. Next came Richard and Cynthia Caldwell, my esteemed in-laws draped in coats to hide their handcuffs. Richard was shouting about his lawyers, about suing the department, about knowing the governor. Cynthia was weeping, mascara running down her cheeks, ruining her $1,000 facial. And then came Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. She wasn't screaming. She was staring at me with pure venom. "You did this," she hissed as she passed. "You ruin everything you touch, old man." I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I simply watched until the caravan of police cars faded into the night, leaving me alone in the driveway of a house that was no longer a home but a crime scene. But to understand why I stood there unmoved while my only son was taken away, you have to go back 72 hours. You have to go back to the moment a simple teddy bear tore the mask off a 10-year-old lie. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The invitation said 6 o'clock, but I arrived at 5:30. I have always been a man of punctuality, a habit from 40 years as a forensic accountant. Numbers do not wait, and neither do I. However, as I parked my 10-year-old sedan between a Bentley and a Porsche in the Caldwell's circular driveway, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. I was the stain on their pristine tablecloth. I was Wallace King, the disgraced accountant, the man who lost everything. To them, I was just the poor relation who needed to be managed. I checked my pocket. The envelope was there. Inside was a savings bond for $500. It was not much. It had taken me 4 months of skipping lunches and working late shifts at the library archives to save it. But it was real money, honest money for Mia's college fund. I walked up the steps hearing the string quartet already playing inside. The Caldwell mansion was designed to intimidate. The ceilings were too high, the marble too slippery, and the air smelled of expensive lilies and old money. I entered the ballroom and scanned the crowd for Mia. Instead, I found Richard Caldwell holding court near the champagne fountain. He was a tall man with silver hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than my car. "Ah, Wallace," Richard boomed, his voice carrying over the music. "We were taking bets on whether your car would make it up the hill." The group around him chuckled. It was a polite reflex. I forced a smile and gripped my cane tighter. "Hello, Richard," I said. "The car runs fine. Where is the birthday girl?" "She is changing into her second outfit," Richard said, waving a hand dismissively. "You know how girls are." Cynthia bought her a dress from Paris. Custom fitted. Of course she did. I looked around for Brandon. My son was standing near the buffet, holding a plate of hors d'oeuvres for Vanessa. He looked tired. His shoulders were slumped, and he had that anxious look he always got when he was in this house. He saw me and gave a quick, nervous wave, but he didn't come over. He stayed by his wife's side like a well-trained golden retriever. Vanessa didn't even acknowledge me. She was too busy showing off her diamond bracelet to a woman in a red dress. I retreated to a corner nursing a glass of sparkling water. I watched them. I watched how they moved with the easy arrogance of people who have never had to count pennies at the grocery store. I watched how they looked through the servers as if they were furniture. And I watched how they looked at me. It wasn't hatred. Hatred implies respect. It was pity mixed with annoyance. I was a reminder of a world they thought they were above. A world of consequences. An hour later, the cake was cut. It was a 5-tier monstrosity covered in gold leaf. Mia looked beautiful in her silk dress, but she looked overwhelmed. She was a quiet girl, sensitive and observant, much like her grandmother used to be. When she saw me, her face lit up. "Grandpa," she squealed, breaking protocol and running to hug me. I caught her, spinning her around, despite the ache in my back. "Happy birthday, sweet pea," I whispered. "Did you bring me a story?" she asked. "Better," I said. I handed her the envelope. "It is for your future, for when you go to Harvard or Yale." She opened it and looked at the bond. She didn't understand the value, but she hugged me anyway. "Thank you, Grandpa." Richard stepped in, his hand resting heavily on Mia's shoulder. "How quaint," he said loud enough for the room to hear. "A savings bond. That is very vintage of you, Wallace. It might buy her a textbook by the time she is 18. Laughter rippled through the room. My face burned. "Don't worry," Princess Richard continued, beaming. "Grandpa Richard and Grandma Cynthia have a real gift for you. Bring it in." 2 servers wheeled in a large box wrapped in silver paper. The room went silent. Richard gestured for Mia to open it. She tore the paper away, revealing a massive teddy bear. It was easily 4 feet tall, with fur so soft it looked like spun silk. Its eyes were made of sparkling sapphires, and it wore a velvet bow tie. "It is made of pure alpaca fur from the Andes," Cynthia announced, stepping forward. "We won it at a charity auction in Geneva. It is one of a kind." The guests oohed and awed. Brandon clapped enthusiastically, looking at his in-laws with adoration. Mia buried her face in the bear's fur. "It is so soft," she said. I stood back, feeling the envelope in Mia's hand crumple slightly. I had given her a future. They had given her a toy. I turned to leave, feeling that I had endured enough humiliation for one evening. I wanted to go home to my small apartment, where the air didn't smell of hypocrisy. But then Mia stopped. She pulled back from the bear, her brow furrowed. She pressed her hand against the bear's stomach. "What is wrong, sweetie?" Vanessa asked, sipping her champagne. "There is something hard in his tummy," Mia said. "It is probably just the voice box," Richard said quickly, though he looked annoyed that the moment was being ruined. "No," Mia insisted. "It feels like metal." She dug her small fingers into the dense fur. The stitching on the bear's abdomen was impeccable, except for one small spot where the thread looked slightly different, a shade lighter perhaps. Mia, being 10 and curious, pulled at the loose thread before anyone could stop her. "Mia, don't ruin it," Vanessa snapped. But the thread gave way. The seam popped open about 2 inches. Mia reached inside the stuffing. The room went quiet again, watching the child. She pulled her hand out. In her palm sat a gold pocket watch. It was heavy, gleaming under the chandelier lights. It was an antique, a hunter case design, with intricate engravings of vines and leaves. "Grandpa," she said, looking at me confused, "why does the bear have a clock?" I felt the blood drain from my face. The room spun. The chatter, the music, the clinking of glasses all faded into a dull roar. I knew that watch. I knew every scratch on its surface. I knew the weight of it in my hand. I stepped forward, my cane clattering to the floor. "Let me see that, Mia," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. I took the watch from her trembling hand. My thumb brushed over the latch. It opened with a familiar, soft click. Inside, on the inner lid, was the engraving. The letters were worn but legible. To Wally, forever. Love, Martha. My knees nearly gave out. Martha, my wife, my late wife who had died of a stroke 3 months after the trial. This was her gift to me on our 30th anniversary. This was the watch that had been the center of the prosecution's case against me 10 years ago. I looked up. My vision tunneled. I saw Richard. His tan face had gone distinctively gray. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was staring at the watch in my hand with an expression of pure terror. 10 years ago, I was the chief financial officer for Caldwell Holdings. I was meticulous. I was trusted. Then money went missing from the pension fund. $2 million. When the auditors came, they found the transfer logs on my computer. And in my office safe, they found this watch. They claimed I had bought it with the stolen funds. They claimed it was a trophy. I swore I had never bought it with stolen money. I swore Martha had saved for 5 years to buy it for me legally. But the receipt was missing, and the serial number on the watch matched a batch purchased by a shell company linked to the theft. I was framed. I lost my license. I lost my reputation. I avoided prison only by a plea deal that left me penniless and disgraced. The watch was confiscated as evidence. It was supposed to be in a federal evidence locker or auctioned off by the government years ago. So how was it inside a teddy bear that Richard Caldwell claimed to have just bought in Geneva? Richard lunged forward. "Give me that," he barked, losing all his smooth composure. "It is part of the bear. It is a vintage accessory." He tried to snatch it, but I pulled my hand back. The adrenaline of a decade of suppressed rage flooded my veins, clearing the fog of age. "No," I said. My voice was no longer the voice of a tired old man. It was the voice of the auditor who could spot a discrepancy from a mile away. "This isn't an accessory, Richard. This is my watch." "Don't be senile, Wallace," Vanessa sneered, stepping between us. "You are embarrassing yourself. That is a Swiss antique. You probably just think it looks like yours. You see what you want to see." I held the watch up, the light catching the engraving. "Does a Swiss antique have my wife's name engraved on it, Vanessa? Does it say, 'To Wally'?" Brandon stepped forward, looking pale. "Dad, are you sure? Maybe it is a coincidence." I looked at my son. "A coincidence, Brandon. A coincidence that the evidence that destroyed my life and likely killed your mother ends up in a toy given by the people who testified against me." Richard recovered his wits. He forced a laugh, a harsh barking sound. "Ladies and gentlemen, please forgive Wallace. He has been confused lately. The medication, you know." He signaled to 2 security guards standing by the door. "Please escort Mr. King to his car. He needs to rest." "Give me the watch, Wallace," Richard hissed as he leaned in close, his breath smelling of scotch and fear. "Give it to me or you will never see Mia again." I looked at Mia. She was terrified, clinging to the bear. I looked at the security guards approaching. I knew I couldn't win a physical fight. I was 68 and outnumbered. I snapped the watch shut. I looked Richard dead in the eye. "You can have the watch," I said, keeping my voice low. "But you can't have the truth." I placed the watch back into Mia's hand. I didn't want them to wrestle it from me and claim I was stealing. Grandpa, Mia whispered. "It is okay, sweet pea," I said, touching her cheek. "Keep it safe. It is part of the bear." I turned and walked toward the door, meeting the security guards halfway. I walked with my head high. I could feel Richard's eyes boring into my back. He thought he had won. He thought he had bullied the old man into submission one last time. He thought the threat of losing access to Mia would silence me as it always had. But as I walked out into the cool night air, I wasn't thinking about silence. My mind was racing, putting together pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was solving. The watch wasn't just a trophy. It was a mistake, a slip-up. Criminals get arrogant. They keep souvenirs. And if they kept the watch, what else did they keep? I got into my car and sat in the dark for a moment. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from a cold, hard realization. They didn't buy the bear in Geneva. That bear had been in their attic. I remembered seeing a similar bear years ago when I visited their old lake house. They had repurposed an old toy to save money, thinking I was too senile to notice, and Mia was too young to care. They were cheap, and their cheapness had just handed me the key to my salvation. I started the engine. I didn't go home. I drove to the one place I knew was safe. A small, dusty office above a bakery in South Boston. The office of Patty O'Connell, the only lawyer who hadn't hung up on me 10 years ago. The game had changed. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the hunter. And for the first time in 10 years, I was going to work. The rain hammered against the single window of my studio apartment in South Boston. It was a rhythmic pounding that matched the throbbing in my temples. I sat in my armchair, the leather cracked and worn, staring at the empty space on the wall where a picture of Martha used to hang. I had taken it down years ago, unable to bear the look of pride in her eyes when I had become nothing but a failure. My phone sat on the small side table silent. I had expected the police. I had expected Richard's lawyers. I had not expected the timid knock that came at midnight. I opened the door to find my son standing in the hallway. Brandon looked soaked not just from the rain, but from a sweat that seemed to ooze from his very pores. He didn't look like a man of 40. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment. "Can I come in, Dad?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I stepped aside. He walked in, bringing the smell of expensive cologne and damp wool into my sanctuary of stale coffee and old books. He didn't sit. He paced. He looked at the stacks of files on my desk, the forensic accounting journals I still read to keep my mind sharp, and the small kitchenette that was smaller than his master bathroom. "It is not much, is it?" he said, gesturing vaguely. "It is paid for, Brandon," I said, closing the door. "And it is honest, which is more than I can say for the house you sleep in." He flinched. He stopped pacing and turned to me. His hands were shaking. "Dad, you have to stop. You have to drop this." "Drop what?" I asked, leaning against the counter, crossing my arms. "Drop the fact that your father-in-law had my stolen property. Drop the fact that the very evidence that ruined my life was sitting inside a teddy bear at a birthday party. It wasn't the watch, Dad," Brandon pleaded, his eyes wide and desperate. "Richard explained it to me on the ride home. It was a replica, a vintage piece he bought for parts to restore his own collection. He didn't know it looked like Mom's. He said you were confused. He said the lighting was bad." I stared at him. I looked for a trace of the boy I had raised, the boy who once stood up to a bully in 3rd grade to protect a stray dog. I found nothing. Just a hollow shell filled with fear and Richard Caldwell's lies. "You saw the engraving." "Brandon," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low, "you saw your mother's handwriting. To Wally, forever. Are you telling me Richard Caldwell bought a replica that just happened to be engraved with my nickname and your mother's name?" Brandon looked away. He rubbed his face aggressively. "Dad, you are old. You have been under a lot of stress. Richard thinks, we think, that maybe your memory isn't what it used to be." There it was. The first seed. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the drafty window. They weren't just going to deny it. They were going to dismantle me. "Get out," I said. "Dad, please listen. Richard is furious. He wants to file a restraining order. He says you frightened Mia. He says you were raving. But I convinced him not to call the cops. I told him we could handle this as a family. Handle it how? by getting you help." The door swung open before I could respond. It wasn't locked. I never locked it because I had nothing worth stealing. Vanessa walked in. She didn't look wet. She looked pristine, as if the rain itself was afraid to touch her. She wore a trench coat that cost more than my annual rent, and her face was set in a mask of icy determination. "Stop begging him, Brandon," she said, her voice sharp and metallic. "He doesn't appreciate it." She closed the door behind her and looked around my apartment with unmasked disgust. She ran a gloved finger over the back of my armchair and checked for dust. "You live like a rat, Wallace," she said. "And now you are trying to drag us down into the sewer with you." I looked at her. I realized then that I had never really known this woman. I had thought she was just spoiled. I didn't realize she was dangerous. "I am not the one with a stolen watch inside a child's toy, Vanessa," I said. She laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You and that watch. It is an obsession, a delusion. We spoke to Dr. Arrington tonight. He is a very respected geriatric psychiatrist. He says fixating on lost objects is a classic early sign of dementia. Paranoia, aggression, confusing the past with the present." I tightened my grip on the counter. "So that is the play. I am crazy." "We are worried about you, Wallace," Brandon chimed in, his voice whining. "You haven't been yourself. Last week you forgot where we were meeting for lunch." "I was late because the bus broke down." "Brandon," I snapped. "See," Vanessa said, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Agitation. Denial. You are rewriting history to fit your narrative. You are sick, Wallace, and we are not going to let you traumatize Mia with your hallucinations." She took a step closer. The air in the room seemed to get thinner. "Here is the reality," she said. "There was no watch. Mia opened the bear and found a loose button. You snatched it and started screaming about your dead wife. You terrified a room full of people. We have 50 witnesses who will testify that you were raving like a lunatic. Who are the police going to believe? The respected philanthropist Richard Caldwell, or the disgraced accountant living in a hovel who has a history of mental instability?" "I have no history of mental instability," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You do now," she smiled. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She tossed it onto my small dining table. It slid across the surface and stopped at the edge. "What is this?" I asked. "It is an application for Sunny Meadows," Vanessa said. "It is a premier assisted living facility. Richard is very generous. He is willing to pay for a private room. They specialize in memory care, high security, no unauthorized exits. You will be safe there, Wallace. You won't have to worry about watches or conspiracies or the FBI. You can just rest." I looked at the brochure. Sunny Meadows. I knew the place. It was a warehouse for the unwanted elderly, a place where they medicated you until you were a drooling vegetable just to keep the noise down. And if I refused, I asked, looking up at them. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Then we petition the court for emergency guardianship. We have the affidavit from Dr. Arrington. We have the police report from tonight, where they noted you were creating a disturbance. We will declare you incompetent, Wallace, and we will win. And then you won't get the private room at Sunny Meadows. You will go to the state facility, and you will never see Mia again." Brandon looked at his shoes. "I am sorry, Dad," he mumbled. "It is for your own good. You can't keep living like this. You are a danger to yourself." I looked at my son. The betrayal was absolute. He wasn't just weak. He was complicit. He was willing to bury his own father alive to keep his comfortable life and his wife's approval. He was willing to label me insane to cover up a crime. My mind raced. I was a forensic accountant. My job was to look at a chaotic mess of numbers and find the pattern. I looked at the situation now. The pattern was clear. They held all the cards, money, witnesses, power. If I fought them now, if I screamed and threw them out, they would call the police. They would have me committed by morning. Anything I found in that bear would be dismissed as the ravings of a madman. I needed time. I needed access. I needed them to drop their guard. I looked at Vanessa. She was waiting for me to explode. She wanted me to explode. It would only prove her point. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I let my shoulders slump. I let my face fall. I allowed a tremor to enter my hands. I looked down at the floor, effectively hiding the sharp calculation in my eyes. I don't know, I stammered, letting my voice crack. I was so sure. I looked up at them, making sure my eyes were wet. It felt so real, Brandon. I could feel the engraving. I could hear Martha's voice. Vanessa's posture relaxed slightly. She exchanged a look with Brandon, a look of triumph. "It is the disease talking, Wallace," she said, her voice softening into a fake, soothing tone that was more insulting than her shouting. "It feels real, but it isn't. Your mind is playing tricks on you." I sat down heavily in the armchair, burying my face in my hands. "Maybe you are right," I whispered. "I have been so tired lately. I forget things. I wake up and I don't know where I am." Brandon rushed to my side. He put a hand on my shoulder. "It is okay, Dad," he said, sounding relieved that the conflict was over. "It happens. You are getting older. We just want to take care of you." I took a shuddering breath. "I don't want to go to the state facility," I said, sounding small and defeated. "Please." "Not the state facility. You don't have to," Vanessa said, stepping closer. "Sign the voluntary admission papers for Sunny Meadows. We can have you moved in by the end of the week. Richard will handle everything. You can pack your things. We will even let you bring your books." I looked at the folder. I looked at the pen she was holding out. If I signed, I was giving up my freedom. But if I didn't sign, I was giving up my only chance to destroy them. I needed to be inside the circle to break it. I needed them to think I was neutralized. I took the pen. My hand shook deliberately. "I just want to see Mia," I said. "Before I go in, I want to say goodbye." "Of course," Vanessa said, smiling. Her smile was like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Once you are settled and the doctors stabilize your medication, we will bring Mia to visit." I signed the paper. Not with my usual sharp signature, but with a shaky scrawl. I pushed the folder back to her. "Good," she said, snapping the folder shut. "You made the right choice, Wallace." She turned to leave, not bothering to say goodbye. Brandon lingered for a second. He squeezed my shoulder. "You will like it there, Dad," he said, trying to convince himself. "They have a garden." "Go home, Brandon," I said softly. "Just go home." He left, closing the door behind him. I listened to their footsteps fade down the hallway. I listened until I heard the heavy door of the building close and the engine of their car roar to life. I sat in the silence for a long time. The rain continued to beat against the window. Slowly, I straightened my back. The tremor in my hands vanished. The look of confusion left my eyes, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had packed me away into a nice little box labeled senile. They thought the threat of a nursing home was the end of the story. I reached under the cushion of my armchair and pulled out a small burner phone I had bought 3 days ago, cash only. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 10 years. "Patty," I said when the voice on the other end answered. "Wallace, is that you?" "It is 1 a.m. "I know," I said. "I need you to meet me." "Not at your office. Meet me at the storage unit on 4th Street. "What is going on, Wallace?" "I just signed my life away, Patty. I bought myself about 4 days before they haul me off to the loony bin. That gives us 96 hours. 96 hours for what?" To prove that I am the sanest person in this family, I said, standing up and walking to the window, watching the taillights of my son's car disappear into the dark Boston night. And to find out what else is inside that teddy bear besides a watch. I hung up. I wasn't Wallace King, the victim, anymore. I wasn't the tired old grandfather. I was the undercover agent in my own life. They wanted a performance. I would give them the greatest performance of my career. And when the curtain finally fell, they would be the ones wondering what was real. The next morning, I prepared for the role of a lifetime. I didn't pack my sharp navy blazers or the crisp white shirts I had worn for 30 years as a professional. Instead, I went to the back of my closet. I dug out a moth-eaten gray cardigan that smelled of camphor. I found a pair of trousers that were slightly too short and a shirt with a coffee stain on the collar that I had never managed to get out. I stopped shaving. The stubble on my chin was gray and patchy. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see Wallace King, the sharp-eyed auditor. I saw a ghost. I practiced the tremor in my right hand. I let my jaw go slack. I dulled the intelligence in my eyes until they looked watery and vacant. It was humiliating. It was necessary. When Brandon arrived to pick me up, he didn't even meet my gaze. He just took the battered suitcase from my hand and sighed. The drive to the Caldwell estate was silent. I sat in the passenger seat clutching a brown paper bag, as if it contained gold. It actually contained my toothbrush and a highly sensitive omnidirectional microphone I had salvaged from an old surveillance kit. "We are just going to get you settled, Dad," Brandon said, as we pulled into the long driveway. "Vanessa has set up the guest room on the first floor. It is safer. No stairs." I didn't answer. I just stared out the window and hummed a tuneless melody. I saw Brandon grip the steering wheel tighter. My silence was working. The house was a fortress of pretension. As we walked in, Vanessa was waiting in the foyer. She was wearing a white silk blouse and holding a clipboard as if she were managing a hotel, not a home. She looked me up and down, her lip curling slightly at the sight of my stained cardigan. "You are early," she said, checking her watch. "The nurse from Sunny Meadows is coming tomorrow for the assessment. Until then, try not to wander." I looked at her. I waited 3 seconds too long to respond. "Hello, Martha," I said, my voice raspy. "Did you make the pot roast?" Vanessa rolled her eyes. "I am not Martha Wallace. Martha is dead. I am Vanessa, your daughter-in-law." "Oh," I said, looking confused. "Oh, yes. Vanessa, where is the bus?" She let out a sharp breath of annoyance. "There is no bus, Wallace. Go to your room. Brandon, show him." As Brandon led me down the hallway, I wasn't looking at the expensive art on the walls. I was scanning the ceiling corners. Dome camera above the main entrance. Motion sensor in the hallway. Another camera pointing at the kitchen. They had a sophisticated system, but every system has a blind spot. I noted that the camera near the library was angled too low. It missed the upper corner of the doorframe. Perfect. The guest room was sterile. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige furniture. It was a cell with high thread count sheets. Brandon put my suitcase on the bed. "Stay here, Dad," he said. "I will bring you some lunch." I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. I counted to 500. Then I stood up. The tremor in my hand vanished. I moved to the door and cracked it open. The hallway was empty. I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. I shuffled out into the hall, dragging my feet to create the sound of a confused old man. I made my way toward the library. This was Richard's sanctuary. If there was a physical ledger or a backup drive, it would be there. I pushed the heavy oak door open. The library was empty. I moved quickly. I didn't have the luxury of time. I scanned the room. Mahogany desk, wall-to-wall bookshelves. A large oil painting of Richard standing on a yacht hung behind the desk. It was cliché, but criminals are often creatures of habit. I walked behind the desk. I ran my fingers along the frame of the painting. I felt a small latch. I didn't open it. not yet. That would trigger an alarm if I wasn't careful. I just needed to know it was there. I checked the desk drawers. Locked. I looked under the desk. Nothing. Then I heard footsteps. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I simply turned around, walked to the middle of the room, and stood there staring at a globe. The door swung open. It was Richard. He was on his phone, looking angry. "No, I told you to route the funds through the shell company in Panama, not the one in—" He stopped when he saw me. He lowered the phone. "What the hell are you doing in here, Wallace?" I looked at him blankly. I reached out and spun the globe. "I am looking for Chicago," I said. "My sister lives in Chicago. I need to call her." Richard stared at me. His eyes narrowed, searching for a crack in my mask. I kept my mouth slightly open, my breathing audible. I looked at the globe as if it were a magical artifact. "Your sister died 5 years ago." "Wallace," Richard said, his voice cold. "Get out. This is a private office." I blinked. "Dead." "No. She called me yesterday." Richard sighed. It was a sound of pure exasperation. He put the phone back to his ear. "Hold on," he said into the receiver. "The old man is wandering again." "Yeah, he is completely gone." Brain turned to mush. "Look, just make sure the transfer happens before the gala on Saturday. I want those accounts clean." He walked past me and sat at his desk, not even bothering to lower his voice. He waved a hand at me, shooing me away like a stray dog. "Go on, Wallace. Go find your soup." I turned and shuffled out. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a hammer. He had just confirmed it. A transfer. Before Saturday. And he had done it right in front of me because to him I wasn't a witness. I was furniture. I was a broken appliance waiting to be thrown out. I made my way to the dining room. I needed to plant the bug. But I needed a distraction. Lunch was a tense affair. Brandon sat silently poking at his salad. Vanessa was on her tablet, ignoring everyone. Richard was still in his office. I sat at the end of the table. A bowl of tomato soup was placed before me. I picked up my spoon. I let my hand shake violently. Soup sloshed over the rim onto the pristine white tablecloth. "Oh, for God's sake," Vanessa snapped, slamming her tablet down. "Can't you eat like a human being?" "I am sorry," I mumbled, dropping the spoon. It clattered loudly against the china. I didn't mean to." Brandon reached over to help, but Vanessa stopped him. "Let him clean it up," she said. "He is not an invalid yet." I grabbed a napkin and started dabbing at the stain, making it worse. I knocked over the water glass. Crystal shattered. Water soaked into the expensive rug. Vanessa shrieked. She stood up, her chair scraping back. "That is it. I can't deal with this. Brandon, get the maid. I am going to the spa. I cannot look at this anymore." She stormed out. Brandon gave me a look of profound pity mixed with exhaustion. "Stay there, Dad," he said. "I will get someone." He ran after his wife. I was alone. Immediately, the shaking stopped. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small black microphone. It was the size of a dime with an adhesive back. I looked around. The dining room connected to the main living area where they spent their evenings. Under the heavy oak dining table was too risky. I looked at the sideboard. A large decorative vase sat there filled with dried branches. I moved with the speed of a man half my age. I slipped the microphone inside the dense arrangement of branches, angling it toward the living room archway. It was invisible. I sat back down just as the maid rushed in with towels. I resumed my trembling. "I am sorry," I whispered to her. "I am so sorry." She looked at me kindly. "It is okay, Mr. King. Accidents happen." She didn't know that this accident was the most deliberate act of my life. That evening, the real show began. I was sitting in the corner of the living room in a high-backed armchair. I had a blanket over my knees. I had let my head loll to the side and my eyes were closed. To anyone watching, I was asleep. Richard and Cynthia were on the sofa not 10 feet away. They were drinking scotch, expensive scotch, the kind bought with other people's retirement funds. "Is the application for the nursing home ready?" Richard asked. "Signed and sealed," Cynthia replied. "The judge is a friend of my father's. He will push the emergency guardianship through by Monday. We cite imminent danger to self and others. The water glass incident today will help." "Good," Richard said. "I don't want him around for the gala. It is bad for the image." They clinked glasses. I kept my breathing shallow and rhythmic. "What about the girl?" Cynthia asked. "Mia. She keeps asking about the bear." Richard laughed. "I told her the bear had to go to the toy hospital. I said it had a loose thread. And the watch." "Destroyed," Richard said. "I took a hammer to it and melted the gold scraps. Threw the rest in the river. No evidence, no crime." My heart stopped for a second. Destroyed. The watch was gone. The physical link to the past was gone. A wave of grief washed over me, so potent I almost gasped. That watch was the last thing Martha touched. But I forced the emotion down. I had to be cold. If the watch was gone, I needed something better. I needed the digital trail. "Did you wipe the drive?" Cynthia asked. "The one in the safe." "Not yet," Richard said. "I need the ledger for the transfer on Saturday. Once the money is moved to the Cayman accounts, I will wipe it. The code is still your birthday, darling. I am a sentimental man." Cynthia giggled. "You are a crook, Richard." "I am a successful crook," he corrected. "And Wallace King is just a senile old fool who couldn't catch a cold, let alone a thief." I sat there listening to them laugh. I memorized the information, the safe behind the painting. The code is Cynthia's birthday. The transfer is Saturday. I had everything I needed. Except for one thing. Access. The library was locked at night, and during the day, the house was crawling with staff. I needed a window of opportunity. Suddenly, Mia ran into the room. She was wearing her pajamas. "Grandpa," she shouted. She ran to my chair and shook my arm. "Grandpa, wake up!" I opened my eyes slowly. I had to stay in character. "Hello, Sweet Pea," I said, blinking groggily. Who are you?" Mia's face fell. It was heartbreaking. "Grandpa, it is me. Mia." Richard stood up. "Mia, leave him alone. He doesn't know you. He is sick." "No, he isn't," Mia yelled, stomping her foot. "He gave me the bond. He remembers." She hugged me tight. I felt her small frame shaking. I wanted to hug her back. I wanted to tell her that Grandpa was sharp as a tack and was going to burn this house down to save her. But I couldn't. I let my arms hang limp. Richard pulled her away. "Go to bed, Mia. Now." As she was dragged away crying, she looked back at me. Her eyes were full of confusion and fear. It was the hardest moment of the entire charade, but I etched that image into my mind. I would use it as fuel. Once the room was empty and the lights were dimmed, I waited. I waited until the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 2 in the morning. I threw off the blanket. I didn't need the cane. I moved silently through the dark house. The floorboards creaked, but I knew where to step. I had been watching. I had been mapping the squeaks during my aimless wandering earlier that day. I reached the library door. Locked. I reached into my pocket. I didn't have a key, but I had a paperclip I had swiped from the kitchen drawer. It was crude, but these interior locks were designed for privacy, not security. I knelt down. My hands, which had been shaking all day, were now steady as a surgeon's. I felt the tumblers inside the lock. Click, click. The door groaned softly. I slipped inside. I went straight to the painting. I found the latch. The painting swung forward, revealing a sleek gray wall safe. Cynthia's birthday. I knew it. I had been at the party. August 15th, 0815. I punched in the numbers. The keypad beeped softly. Green light. The safe door clicked open. Inside there was no gold, no cash, just a single black hard drive and a stack of files. I didn't take them. If I took them, they would know. They would run. I pulled out my phone. I took photos of every document. Then I pulled out a small USB drive I had brought with me. I plugged it into the hard drive's interface port. It was a cloning tool. It would take 10 minutes to copy the directory. 10 minutes. I stood there in the dark watching the small progress bar on the cloner blink blue. 20%. I heard a noise in the hallway. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps. I froze. The footsteps stopped right outside the library door. The doorknob turned. I had locked it from the inside again, but if they had a key... "Who is in there?" Richard's voice grumbled. He sounded half asleep. I yanked the cloner out. 40%. It wasn't enough, but it had to be. I closed the safe. I swung the painting back. The key rattled in the lock. I had seconds. There was nowhere to hide, so I didn't hide. I walked to the corner of the room, pulled down my pajama pants, and stood facing the bookshelf. The door opened. The light flicked on. Richard stood there in his silk robe, a pistol in his hand. He saw me. He lowered the gun and groaned in disgust. "Oh, God. Wallace, are you pissing on my first editions?" I turned around slowly, looking dazed. My pants were around my ankles. "The toilet," I mumbled. I couldn't find the water closet." Richard looked at me with pure loathing. He didn't see a spy. He didn't see a threat. He saw a senile incontinence problem. "Get out," he roared. "Get out of here before I shoot you myself." I pulled up my pants, fumbling with the waistband. I shuffled past him, eyes downcast. "I am sorry," I whispered. "I am lost." "You are pathetic," Richard spat. I walked back to my room. My heart was racing so fast I thought I would have a stroke. But inside my pocket, my hand closed around the USB drive. I didn't get the whole drive, but I got the index, and I had the photos of the physical files. I lay down on the bed. I stared at the ceiling. I was pathetic. I was disgusting. I was senile. And I had them. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a held breath. I lay in the dark guest room listening to the settling noises of the mansion. My clock read 3 in the morning. My body ached from the tension of maintaining the charade, but my mind was wired. I knew I couldn't stay in bed. I had cloned the index of the safe, but I needed the physical evidence. I needed to know why Richard had panicked so visibly over a toy. Then I heard it. The service door near the kitchen opened. It was a heavy sound, a distinct thud that I had catalogued earlier. I moved to the window. The guest room faced the back of the estate where the 6-car garage and the waste management area were located. I pulled back the curtain just an inch. Outside, under the harsh glare of the security floodlights, I saw the groundskeeper. He was dragging a large black plastic bag. It was lumpy and awkward. He wasn't treating it with care. He dragged it across the asphalt toward the industrial-sized dumpster that sat near the rear gate. He hefted the bag up and tossed it in. Then he dusted his hands off, lit a cigarette, and walked back toward the staff quarters. I knew that shape. Even inside a black bag, I knew the silhouette of the alpaca bear. They were destroying the evidence. The garbage trucks came on Thursday mornings. Today was Thursday. I checked my watch. 3:15. The trucks usually arrived at 5. I had less than 2 hours to retrieve the bear before it was crushed into a cube of compressed refuse. I dressed quickly in the dark, putting my stained cardigan back on over my pajamas. I needed to look the part of the confused wanderer if I was caught. I slipped my feet into my loafers and opened the bedroom door. The hallway was empty. The night lights cast long, eerie shadows. I moved past the kitchen, avoiding the squeaky floorboard near the pantry. I reached the service door. It was locked from the inside with a deadbolt. I turned it slowly, wincing as it clicked. The night air hit me like a slap. It was freezing damp and smelled of wet earth. I stepped out into the shadows. The floodlights were my enemy now. I had to stick to the perimeter of the paved area, using the bulk of the garage to shield me from the cameras I had mapped earlier. I moved with a speed I hadn't used in decades. My knees protested. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. I felt every year of my age in that moment. I wasn't a spy. I was an old man in pajamas sneaking through a backyard to dig through trash. If Martha could see me now, she would be horrified. Or maybe she would be proud. She always hated how Richard wasted things. I reached the dumpster. It was a massive green metal container, the kind used for construction sites or restaurants. The side was slick with rain. I couldn't reach the top. I looked around. I saw a stack of wooden pallets near the garage wall. I dragged 2 of them over my heart, hammering in my chest. The scraping sound seemed deafening in the silence. I froze, waiting for a shout or a siren. Nothing. Just the wind in the trees. I climbed onto the pallets. The smell hit me immediately. Rotting seafood from the party, stale champagne, wet cardboard. It was the smell of excess. The smell of a family that consumed and discarded without a second thought. I peered over the rim. The dumpster was half full. The black bag was sitting near the center, resting on a pile of broken floral arrangements. It was just out of reach. I had no choice. I swung my leg over the metal rim and dropped inside. My landing was soft but disgusting. My foot sank into something squishy, probably a discarded cake. I lost my balance and fell forward, my hands plunging into a bag of coffee grounds. I gagged. The stench was overwhelming. I was knee-deep in the refuse of the people who had ruined my life. I scrambled toward the black bag. I ripped the plastic open. The bear stared back at me. It was a ruin. The beautiful alpaca fur was slashed open. The stuffing was spilling out like white entrails. Its glass eyes were gone, likely pried out by Richard, because he couldn't bear to throw away the sapphires. The tummy, where the watch had been, was completely hollowed out. I pulled the carcass of the bear onto my lap, sitting amidst the garbage. I felt a wave of despair. It was empty. Richard had been thorough. He had removed the watch, he had removed the gems, and he had slashed the lining to make sure nothing else was hidden. I ran my hands through the remaining stuffing. Nothing. Just fluff. I was about to throw it back when I stopped. I looked at the bear's head. It was still intact, though slightly misshapen. I remembered something. When Mia had held the bear, she hadn't just complained about the tummy. She had said the bear was heavy. Alpaca fur is light. Stuffing is light. A pocket watch weighs a few ounces. Why was the bear heavy? I squeezed the bear's paw. Soft. I squeezed the other paw. Soft. I grabbed the bear's head. It felt solid. Too solid. I dug my fingers into the neck seam. The thread was thick industrial nylon. I pulled, but it wouldn't give. I looked around for a tool. I found a shard of a broken wine bottle near my foot. I used the glass to saw at the neck of the bear. The fabric tore with a sickening, ripping sound. I pulled the head back. Buried deep in the center of the head, encased in a ball of duct tape, was a small, hard object. I peeled the tape away. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it into the sludge. It wasn't a voice box. It wasn't another watch. It was a solid-state drive. A portable SSD, the military-grade kind. Waterproof. Shockproof. I stared at it in the dim light. Why? Why would Richard hide a drive inside a bear? Then it hit me. The date. The auction tag I had seen briefly on the box said Geneva 2018. That was the year Richard was being investigated by the SEC for the first time. He had wriggled out of it claiming a lack of records. He hadn't destroyed the records. He had panicked. He needed to get the data out of the country or hide it somewhere no warrant would look. A custom-made teddy bear sitting in an attic or a child's room is the perfect Trojan horse. Who subpoenas a stuffed animal? And then he forgot. Or he got comfortable. And when Cynthia decided to regift the bear to Mia to save money, she didn't know she was handing over the entire criminal history of the Caldwell Empire. I slipped the drive into my pajama pocket. It felt burning hot against my leg. This was it. This was the smoking gun. Suddenly, a light swept over the dumpster. I ducked down, burying myself in the trash bags. The sound of a vehicle approaching. Tires crunching on gravel. It wasn't the garbage truck. It was a private security patrol car. The Caldwells paid for a private service to patrol the neighborhood. The car stopped right next to the dumpster. I held my breath. I could smell the exhaust fumes mixing with the garbage stench. "Check the back gate," the driver's voice said. The motion sensor tripped near the garage. "Copy that," a second voice replied. A flashlight beam danced over the rim of the dumpster. It swept across the bags. It lingered on the spot where I was curled up, covered by a large plastic sheet I had pulled over myself. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. A rat scurried across my shoe. I wanted to scream, but I bit my lip until I tasted blood. "Nothing here, just trash," the voice said. "Probably a raccoon." The car idled for a moment longer, then pulled away. I waited until the sound of the engine faded completely. Then I waited another 5 minutes. I climbed out of the dumpster. It was harder getting out than getting in. I had to stack bags to make a step. I rolled over the edge and hit the pavement hard. My shoulder screamed in pain. I lay there for a moment, panting, looking at the sky. It was starting to lighten in the east. Dawn was coming. I grabbed the ruined bear. I couldn't leave it there. If they saw it had been tampered with further, they might get suspicious. I shoved it back into the black bag and tied it as best as I could. I tossed it back in. I limped back to the house. I was covered in filth. I smelled like a sewer. I reached the service door. I slipped inside and locked it. I made it to the guest room bathroom just as the first birds began to sing. I stripped off my clothes. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw. I washed the cardigan in the sink using hand soap, hoping to get the smell out. I hid the SSD inside the hollow curtain rod above the window. When I finally lay back down in bed, clean and exhausted, the sun was coming up. At 7 a.m., the door opened. Vanessa walked in holding a cup of coffee. She wrinkled her nose. "It smells terrible in here," she said. "Like garbage." I looked at her. I gave her my best vacuous smile. "I had a bad dream, Vanessa," I said. "I dreamed I was a raccoon." She looked at me with disgust. "You are deteriorating faster than we thought, Wallace. The nurse will be here in an hour. Try to look presentable." She set the coffee down and left. I reached for the cup. My hand wasn't shaking. I took a sip. It was the best coffee I had ever tasted. I looked at the curtain rod. I had the drive. I had the clone of the index. Now I just needed to know what was on that drive. And I needed to make sure that when I revealed it, the whole world was watching. The nurse arrived at 8. She was a stern woman with cold hands. She asked me questions. "Who is the president? What year is it? Count backwards from 100 by sevens." I answered them all wrong. I told her the president was Reagan. I told her it was 1995. I couldn't count past 93. She scribbled on her clipboard. "Severe cognitive decline," she whispered to Richard in the hallway. "He needs immediate placement." Richard looked at me through the open door. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who had won the lottery. "Pack his bags," he said. "We will move him to Sunny Meadows on Sunday, right after the gala." Sunday. That gave me 48 hours. I needed to get the drive to Patty, but I couldn't leave the house. I was under watch. I needed a courier, someone they wouldn't suspect, someone who could walk out of this house with a military-grade hard drive in their pocket without anyone batting an eye. I looked out the window. Mia was playing in the garden. She was sitting on the bench looking sad. She didn't have her bear. I knew who my courier was. It was risky. It was dangerous. But Mia was a king, and kings don't fold. I waited until Vanessa went to her Pilates class and Richard locked himself in his study. Brandon was at work. I wandered out to the garden, shuffling my feet. Mia saw me. She didn't run to me this time. She looked wary. They had probably told her I was dangerous. "Hi, Grandpa," she said softly. I sat down on the bench next to her. I didn't look at her. I looked at the roses. "Mia," I said, dropping the act. My voice was clear and sharp. She looked at me, surprised. "Grandpa, you sound normal." "I am normal, sweetie. It is a game. We are playing a game." "A game?" she asked. "Yes, like spies." Her eyes widened. "Spies? Listen to me very carefully, Mia. I need you to do something very brave." I reached into my pocket. I had wrapped the SSD in a clean handkerchief. "I need you to take this. When you go to school tomorrow, I need you to give it to the lady in the blue car who will be waiting at the corner. Her name is Patty. She is a friend." Mia took the package. "What is it?" "It is the truth, Mia. It is the truth about the bear and the watch." She squeezed it tight. "Is this why they took the bear away?" "Yes." She nodded, her jaw set in a determined line that looked exactly like her father used to look before he lost his spine. "I will do it, Grandpa. Good girl. Now run along. And remember, I am still the confused old man." She winked at me. A clumsy 10-year-old wink. "Bye, Grandpa. Hope you find your marbles." I watched her run back to the house. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The pieces were moving. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the party. I sat in the small office above the bakery watching the cursor blink on the screen. The air smelled of yeast and old paper, a combination that usually brought me comfort, but today it smelled like war. Patty O'Connell sat across from me. She was younger than me by 20 years, but the lines around her eyes were deep etched by decades of fighting for lost causes. She had the military-grade solid-state drive plugged into her isolated laptop. She had been typing for 10 minutes without saying a word. The drive was the one Mia had successfully handed off that morning. My granddaughter had played her part perfectly. Now it was my turn. Patty stopped typing. She took off her glasses and looked at me. Her face was pale. "Wallace," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you have any idea what you were sitting on?" I leaned forward. I adjusted my own glasses. The tremors I had feigned for the last 3 days were gone. My hands were steady. My mind was sharp. I wasn't the senile old man in the cardigan anymore. I was the man who had audited Fortune 500 companies before Richard Caldwell even knew how to tie a tie. "Show me," I said. Patty turned the screen toward me. It was a labyrinth of folders. But to my trained eye, it was not a labyrinth. It was a map. "Richard didn't just keep a ledger," Patty said, pointing to a column of figures. "He kept everything. Every bribe, every kickback, every laundered dollar. He was so arrogant he thought he would never be caught, so he treated this drive like a trophy case." I pulled the keyboard toward me. My fingers flew across the keys. I didn't look at the totals. Amateurs look at totals. I looked at the flows. I looked at the dates. Here I said, tapping the screen. Look at this entry. The Children's Hope Foundation. Patty frowned. That is their charity. They raise millions for orphans. I laughed. It was a dry, cold sound. They raise millions for themselves, Patty. Look at the outflows. 80% of the donations go to administrative costs. And look where those costs are paid. I opened a subfolder. I traced the routing numbers. They are paid to a consulting firm called Blue Horizon, I said. I know Blue Horizon, Patty said. They are a legitimate logistics company. Are they? I opened another window. I accessed the public registry I had memorized years ago. Blue Horizon is registered in Delaware. Its registered agent is a law firm in Panama. And if you look at the board of directors for Blue Horizon, you will see 3 names. I highlighted the names. Thomas Anderson, Sarah Miller, James Smith. Generic names, Patty noted. Dead names, I corrected. I recognized Thomas Anderson. He was a maintenance worker at Caldwell Holdings, who died in '98. Richard is using ghost employees to siphon the charity money into the consulting firm. And then I asked, where does the money go from Blue Horizon? I traced the next step. The money moved from Blue Horizon to a series of real estate holding companies in the Cayman Islands. And from there, it came back to the U.S. as clean investment capital used to buy luxury properties, properties that Richard and Cynthia own personally. It is a classic washing cycle, I said, leaning back. Placement, layering, integration. He takes dirty money from the charity, washes it through the consulting firm, and brings it back as clean real estate assets. He is stealing from orphans to buy vacation homes. Patty looked sick. She reached for her water glass. That is federal fraud, Wallace. That is 20 years minimum. I shook my head. No, Patty. That is just the appetizer. I want the main course. I navigated to the folder dated 10 years ago. The folder marked with the year my life was destroyed. I needed to find the watch. Not the physical watch I knew that was gone. I needed the digital footprint of the frame job. I scrolled through the months leading up to my trial. I looked for the $2 million that had gone missing from the pension fund. The money I was accused of stealing. There it was. A transfer of $2 million. But it didn't go to me. It went to a shell company called Janus Limited. I clicked on Janus Limited. The file was encrypted. Patty leaned in. Can you crack it? I smiled. Richard is a creature of habit. He uses the same ciphers for everything. He thinks he is clever using literary references. I typed in a password. Gatsby. Access denied. I thought for a second. Richard loved to quote Machiavelli. I typed in Prince. Access granted. The file opened. It was a list of shareholders for Janus Limited. There was only one shareholder. Vanessa Caldwell. I froze. I stared at the name. My daughter-in-law. Patty gasped. She was in on it. She wasn't just in on it, I said, my voice turning to ice. She was the architect. Look at the date of incorporation. It was established 2 weeks before she started dating Brandon. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Vanessa didn't marry Brandon for love. She married him to get close to the company, to get close to me. She was the mole. She was the one who planted the files on my computer. She was the one who knew the combination to my office safe because I had foolishly trusted her to retrieve documents for me when I was sick. She stole the watch, I whispered. It wasn't Richard. It was Vanessa. She took it from my safe and gave it to Richard as a trophy, a symbol of their victory over the honest accountant. I felt a rage so pure it almost blinded me, but I pushed it down. Rage is useless. Evidence is power. I kept digging. I found the transaction that paid for the evidence against me. A payment of $50,000 to a forensic tech consultant named Gary Sneed. I know him, Patty said. He was the expert witness for the prosecution. He testified that the logs on your computer were authentic. He was paid off, I said, pointing to the wire transfer. Here is the proof. He didn't find the logs. He planted them. We sat in silence for a moment. The magnitude of the evil was suffocating. They hadn't just stolen money. They had systematically dismantled a human being. They had planned it over Sunday dinners. They had laughed about it at birthday parties. But why now? Patty asked. Why keep the records? Why not delete them? Because Richard doesn't trust Vanessa, I said. I pointed to a subclause in the Janus Limited file. It was a blackmail folder. Richard kept proof of Vanessa's involvement to keep her in line, and Vanessa probably has proof against him. They are a nest of vipers held together by mutual assured destruction. And the teddy bear? The teddy bear was Richard's insurance policy, I said. If he ever got caught, he could trade this drive for a reduced sentence. He could rat out Vanessa and everyone else. He was ready to burn his own daughter-in-law to save his skin. I stood up and walked to the window. The street below was busy with people going about their honest lives. They had no idea that monsters lived in the mansions on the hill. We have enough to bury them, Patty said, closing the laptop. We can go to the FBI right now. No, I said, turning around. Patty looked confused. Wallace, this is a slam dunk. Why wait? Because if we go to the FBI now, they will arrest them quietly. Richard will make bail. He will hire the best lawyers. He will spin the story. He will say the drive was planted. He will drag this out for another 10 years. And even if he goes to jail, he will go with his reputation intact in certain circles. He will still be the philanthropist who made a mistake. I don't want him to just go to jail, Patty. I want him destroyed. I want his name to be synonymous with filth. I want the world to see him for what he is. I walked back to the table. I tapped the screen. Look at the schedule, I said. Patty looked. The gala, she said. Saturday night. The Citizen of the Year award, I said. The governor will be there. The press will be there. Every major donor in Boston will be there. It is the perfect stage. But how? Patty asked. Security will be tight. You are persona non grata. If you show up at the door, they will throw you out. I am not going to show up at the door, I said. And we are not going to just hand this drive to the police. We are going to give a presentation. I looked at the technical specs of the venue in Richard's files. He was obsessed with micromanaging the event, so he had the blueprints of the hotel ballroom. The audiovisual system is networked, I said. It is connected to the hotel's main server. Can you hack it? Patty asked. I shook my head. I am an accountant, not a hacker. But I know someone who is. I pulled a card from my wallet. It was bent and faded. Who is that? Patty asked. Remember the intern Richard fired 5 years ago for pointing out a discrepancy in the petty cash? The kid with the purple hair. Leo. Leo, I said. He works for a cybersecurity firm now. He hates Richard almost as much as I do. I looked at the clock. We have 36 hours. I need you to get Leo. I need you to prep the video package. I want the footage of Richard stealing the watch combined with the bank transfers. I want it edited like a documentary of his corruption. And what are you going to do? Patty asked. I am going back, I said. Back to the house. Yes. I need to be there. I need to keep them calm. I need them to think I am still the senile old man waiting to be shipped off to the nursing home. If I disappear now, they will panic and cancel the gala or run. I need to be the bait. It is dangerous, Wallace, Patty said, grabbing my hand. If they find out, you know. They won't, I said. I have played this role for 3 days. I can play it for 2 more. I took the drive. I copied the files to a secure cloud server. Then I handed the physical drive back to Patty. Keep this safe. If anything happens to me, send it to the Attorney General. I put my coat back on. I hunched my shoulders. I let my face go slack. Wallace King, the sharp auditor, disappeared, and the confused grandfather returned. One more thing, Patty. Yes, Wallace. Check the account ending in 459. She checked it. It is a small account. Only a few $1,000s. Look at the beneficiary. She clicked on it. Her eyes widened. Mia King. He was using Mia's identity. I said, my voice trembling with real anger now. He opened a credit line in my granddaughter's name to pay for his mistresses. He was ruining her credit before she even finished elementary school. Patty slammed the laptop shut. Her face was hard. I will get Leo, she said. We will burn them down, Wallace. We will burn them all down. I nodded. I walked out of the office and back into the rain. I had to get back to the mansion before they noticed I was gone. I had to go back into the belly of the beast. But this time I wasn't afraid. I carried the truth in my mind like a weapon. Every insult they had thrown at me, every look of pity, every moment of humiliation was fuel for the fire that was coming. Saturday night wouldn't just be a gala. It would be an execution. And I would be the one pulling the switch. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. The air smelled of expensive lilies and even more expensive desperation. This was the night of the Boston Civic Gala, the night Richard Caldwell would be crowned Citizen of the Year. Outside, the paparazzi were flashing their bulbs, blinding anyone who stepped out of a limousine. Inside, the champagne was flowing like water, and the laughter was loud and brittle. It was a gathering of sharks congratulating each other on the sharpness of their teeth. I arrived in a yellow taxi that stood out against the line of black town cars like a bruise. I paid the driver with cash, counting out the bills slowly, my hands shaking, just enough to keep up appearances. I wore my tuxedo from 30 years ago. It smelled faintly of mothballs and hung loosely on my frame, the fabric slightly shiny at the elbows. I hadn't polished my shoes. I looked exactly like what they expected me to be. A relic. A sad, confused old man who had wandered out of the attic. The doorman hesitated as I approached the velvet rope. He looked at my frayed cuffs and my wild gray hair. "Sir, this is a private event," he said, stepping in front of me. I looked up at him, blinking rapidly. "I am here for Richard," I said, my voice quavering. "It is his big night. He told me there would be cake." The doorman sighed, looking around for assistance. Just then, Brandon appeared at the top of the stairs. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, but he looked small inside it. When he saw me, his face went slack with horror. "Dad!" he hissed, rushing down the steps. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be in your room." I smiled at him, a lopsided grin that I knew made me look deranged. "I took the bus, Brandon. The bus driver was nice. Is Richard getting his medal yet?" Brandon grabbed my arm, his grip painful. "You have to leave. Now. Before Vanessa sees you. She will kill us both." "But I want to see the balloons," I whined, pulling away from him. It was too late. The commotion had drawn attention. Heads were turning. People were whispering. And then Richard appeared. He looked magnificent. I had to give him that. He was wearing a midnight blue tuxedo with a silk lapel. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch in one hand, and he radiated the confidence of a man who believes he is untouchable. Vanessa was at his side in a red dress that looked like a wound. When Richard saw me, he didn't get angry. He didn't panic. He smiled. It was a benevolent, pitying smile. The smile of a saint dealing with a leper. "Let him stay, Brandon," Richard said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "What?" Vanessa snapped. "Are you insane? He smells like a closet." Richard placed a hand on my shoulder. He squeezed it hard enough to bruise, but his face remained beatific. It shows compassion, Vanessa. Look at him. He just wanted to see his family. If we kick him out, we look heartless. If we let him stay, we look like saints caring for a burden. He looked down at me, his eyes cold and dead. Hello, Wallace. Did you come to clap for me? I nodded vigorously. Yes, Richard. You are the Citizen of the Year. That is right, Wallace. I am. He turned to the doorman. Let him in. Put him at table 42. It is in the back near the kitchen. Make sure he has a handler. I don't want him wandering onto the stage. Vanessa glared at me, but she stepped aside. You behave yourself, old man, she whispered. One wrong move and I will have security drag you out by your hair. I shuffled past them, keeping my head down. Thank you, Vanessa. You look very pretty, like a fire engine. I heard snickers from the guests standing nearby. I walked into the ballroom. It was a cavern of gold and crystal. Hundreds of people were seated at round tables laden with silver cutlery and floral centerpieces that were taller than Mia. I was led to table 42. It was indeed in the back, tucked behind a large pillar near the service entrance. The other people at the table were the undesirable guests. A second cousin from Ohio who drank too much, an elderly aunt who was deaf, and me. I sat down. I placed my napkin on my lap. I watched the room. I saw the way people looked at me. They didn't look with kindness. They looked with a morbid curiosity. I was the cautionary tale. I was the whispers behind the hands. Did you hear that is Wallace King, the accountant? I heard he lost his mind after the scandal. Look at him. He doesn't even know where he is. They were right about one thing. I didn't know where I was. I wasn't in a ballroom. In my mind, I was in a courtroom, and I was the judge. A waiter poured me a glass of water. I didn't touch it. I reached into my pocket and felt the phone. It was silent. Leo was in the control room by now. He had text messaged me 10 minutes ago. Access established. Waiting for your signal. The signal was simple. When Richard took the stage, I would stand up. But not yet. Dinner was served. Filet mignon and lobster. I pushed the food around my plate. I watched Richard working the room. He was shaking hands, kissing cheeks, laughing that deep baritone laugh. He stopped at the governor's table. He leaned in, whispering something that made the governor nod seriously. He is buying his pardon, I thought. He is cementing his alliances so that when the rumors start, he has a shield. But he didn't know the rumors weren't coming. The truth was coming. Brandon came over to my table once. He didn't sit. He just stood there looking at my untouched food. Eat something, Dad, he said. I am not hungry, Brandon. He sighed. Look, I am sorry about the yelling outside. It is just... This is important for us. For the family name. The family name, I repeated. Yes, the name is very important. Brandon looked at me, searching for something in my eyes. For a second, I thought he saw it. I thought he saw the clarity burning behind the fog. But he looked away. He was too afraid to see the truth. Just stay here, he said. Please. Don't make a scene. He walked away. I watched him go, my son. The boy who used to catch fireflies in a jar and worry about hurting them. Now he was a man who helped bury his father to save his lifestyle. I felt a pang of sorrow, but I strangled it. Tonight was not for sorrow. The lights dimmed. The room went silent. A spotlight hit the stage. The master of ceremonies walked out. He was a famous local news anchor. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed. Tonight, we honor a man of vision, a man of generosity, a man who has given more to the children of Boston than anyone else in history. Applause thundered. I clapped too, my hands making a dry, hollow sound. But before we bring him out, let us watch a tribute to his incredible journey. A large screen descended from the ceiling. Music swelled. Inspirational piano music. Images flashed on the screen. Richard cutting a ribbon. Richard holding a shovel at a groundbreaking. Richard hugging an orphan. I watched the video. It was slick. It was professional. It was a lie. I looked at Richard. He was standing near the stage steps, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked humble. He practiced that look in the mirror, I knew it. The video ended. The applause was even louder this time. The crowd stood up, a standing ovation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the anchor shouted, "your Citizen of the Year, Mr. Richard Caldwell." Richard bounded onto the stage. He shook the anchor's hand. He waved to the crowd. He took the microphone. He waited for the applause to die down. He wiped a fake tear from his eye. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. I am humbled. Truly. When I started the Children's Hope Foundation, I didn't do it for awards. I did it because I believe that every child deserves a chance." I gripped the edge of the table. My knuckles turned white. Every child, I thought. Except my granddaughter, whose identity you stole. Richard continued. "We live in a world where integrity is rare, where people take shortcuts. But I learned from my father that a man is only as good as his word. That honesty is the only currency that matters." The hypocrisy was physical. It felt like a weight pressing on my chest. I looked around the room. They were eating it up. They were nodding. They were wiping their eyes. They believed him. This was the power of the lie. If you tell it big enough and wear a nice enough suit, people will believe anything. I reached into my pocket. I unlocked the phone. I typed one word to Leo, "Now." I put the phone away. I picked up my glass of water and took a sip. Richard was still talking. "And tonight, I want to announce a new initiative, a scholarship fund that will..." The screen behind him flickered. It went black. The inspirational music cut out with a sharp screech of feedback. Richard stopped. He looked back at the screen, confused. Is there a technical problem?" he asked charmingly. The crowd chuckled. Then the screen lit up again. But it wasn't the logo of the foundation. It was a grainy black and white video. It was time-stamped 10 years ago. The room went quiet. Not the respectful silence of before, but a confused silence. On the screen, a man walked into an office. The camera angle was high from the corner. The man was younger, his hair less gray, but it was unmistakably Richard Caldwell. He was holding a gold pocket watch. He walked to a wall safe. He opened it. He placed the watch inside. Then he turned to a woman standing in the doorway. It was Vanessa. "Is it done?" he asked in the video. The audio was crisp thanks to Leo's enhancement. "It is done," Vanessa said. "I put the files on his computer. Wallace has no idea." Richard laughed. The same baritone laugh that had just charmed the room. "Good. The old fool will take the fall for everything. And we keep the 2 million. The video froze on Richard's smiling face. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was a vacuum. You could hear a pin drop. You could hear a career die. Richard stood on stage, his mouth open, his hand half raised. He looked like a statue of a man realizing he was naked. I stood up. I pushed my chair back. It scraped loudly against the floor. I didn't shuffle. I didn't shake. I walked out from behind the pillar. I walked down the center aisle. The sea of black ties parted for me. People stared at me, their eyes wide. I walked toward the stage. I walked with the stride of a man who has nothing left to lose. Richard saw me coming. He gripped the podium. "Turn it off," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Turn it off. It is a fake. It is a deep fake." But the screen didn't turn off. It changed. Now it showed bank statements, dozens of them. Highlighted in red were the transfers from the charity to the Cayman Islands. And then a voiceover played. It was my voice recorded yesterday in the studio. This is the account of the Children's Hope Foundation. And this is the personal account of Richard Caldwell. Note the matching serial numbers. I reached the foot of the stage. I looked up at him. Richard looked down at me. He was sweating. The makeup was running down his face. "Who are you?" he whispered. I smiled. But this time it wasn't a senile smile. It was the smile of the auditor. "I am the man who checks the books, Richard so," I said loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "And you are short." The room was frozen in a tableau of shock. The large screen behind the podium, which moments ago had been displaying Richard's philanthropic achievements, was now a glowing indictment of his soul. The video loop continued. It showed the younger Richard handing the envelope of cash to the forensic technician. It showed Vanessa smiling that cold, reptilian smile as she confirmed the files were planted. The audio was crisp, echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the ballroom. I stood at the base of the stairs, looking up at him. Richard was gripping the sides of the podium so hard his knuckles were white. He looked like a captain whose ship had just been torpedoed, but who was still trying to order the orchestra to play. He looked at the tech booth frantically, slashing his hand across his throat, signaling them to cut the feed. But the booth was empty. Leo had locked the system remotely. The truth was on a loop, and there was no off switch. Deep fake, Richard screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal that betrayed his terror. "This is AI generated. It is a cyber attack. Security, get this man off the stage." He pointed a shaking finger at me. But the security guards didn't move. They were watching the screen. They were watching the man who signed their paychecks admit to a felony. I took the first step up the stairs. My legs felt light. The heaviness of age, the arthritis, the fatigue of the last decade, it all vanished. I was fueled by a righteous energy that burned clean and hot. I took the second step. The crowd parted further. I could hear the whispers turning into a roar. I saw the governor lean over to his aide and whisper something. The aide immediately began typing on his phone, probably drafting a statement, distancing the governor from the radioactive fallout that was Richard Caldwell. I reached the podium. I stood next to Richard. He towered over me physically, but in that moment he looked incredibly small. He smelled of fear. It is a distinct scent, sour and metallic, cutting through his expensive cologne. "Get away from me, Richard," hissed the microphone, picking up his whisper. "You senile old bat, I will ruin you." I looked at him. I didn't need the microphone. My voice had projected across boardrooms and courtrooms for 40 years. It had the weight of facts behind it. "You already did ruin me, Richard," I said, my voice carrying to the back of the room. "You took my job. You took my reputation. You took the last years of my wife's life because the stress of my trial killed her." I turned to the audience. I scanned the faces. I saw confusion. I saw anger. And I saw the dawning realization that they had been applauding a monster. "Do you know what a forensic accountant does?" I asked the room. "We don't look at what people say. We look at what they hide. We look at the space between the numbers." I pointed at the screen. "Sung." The video faded and was replaced by a spreadsheet. It was a complex web of transactions, but I had highlighted the path in bright red. "This is the Children's Hope Foundation," I said, pointing to the top column. "And this," I said, pointing to the bottom, "is a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Blue Horizon." A gasp went through the room. Several donors recognized the names. I saw a woman in the front row put a hand to her mouth. She was wearing a diamond necklace that probably cost less than what Richard stole in a month. "Richard Caldwell has been stealing from orphans for 12 years, I continued. "He takes your donations. He funnels them through a fake consulting firm, and then he uses that money to buy real estate. That villa in Tuscany he showed you photos of last summer. You paid for that. The yacht he sails on weekends. The orphans paid for that. Lies, Richard shouted, grabbing the microphone stand. He is crazy. He has dementia. Look at him. He is wearing a 30-year-old tuxedo. He doesn't know what year it is. I turned to him slowly. I do know what year it is, Richard. It is the year you pay. I looked at Vanessa. She was standing near the edge of the stage looking for an exit. Her face was a mask of panic. She realized that the ship wasn't just sinking, it was exploding. And he didn't do it alone, I said, pointing at her. Vanessa Caldwell, my daughter-in-law. She created the shell companies. She falsified the ledgers. And 10 years ago, when I got close to the truth, she planted the evidence that sent me to hell. Vanessa froze. The spotlight swung to her. She held up her hands as if to ward off the light. I didn't, she stammered. I didn't know. He made me do it. Richard spun around. You traitor, he screamed. You came to me. You wanted the money. You wanted the lifestyle. They were turning on each other. The rats were fighting in the cage. But I wasn't finished. I had one more card to play. The card that would turn this crowd from shocked observers into a lynch mob. I walked to the center of the stage. I looked directly at the camera that was broadcasting the event to the local news. Money is one thing, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly quiet. Greed is a common sin. But there is a line that separates a criminal from a monster. I pulled the clicker from my pocket. I changed the slide on the screen. It showed a credit report. A credit report with a very low score. A report filled with defaulted loans and maxed-out credit cards. The name on the report was Mia King. The room went silent again. Mia King is 10 years old, I said. She is my granddaughter. She is Richard's granddaughter. I paused, letting the words sink in. Richard Caldwell and Cynthia Caldwell stole the identity of a 10-year-old girl. They opened credit lines in her name to hide their debts. They ruined her financial future before she even learned long division. They looked at their own flesh and blood and saw a resource to be exploited. The sound that came from the crowd was not a gasp. It was a growl. It was a primal sound of disgust. In this room full of parents and grandparents, the theft of money was forgivable, but the betrayal of a child was a capital offense. Cynthia, who had been sitting at the head table looking like she wanted to faint, suddenly stood up. I didn't know, she wailed. Richard told me it was a trust fund. Sit down, Cynthia. Richard roared, losing all control. You signed the papers. You knew everything. I looked at Brandon. My son was standing in the aisle. He was looking at the screen. He was looking at his daughter's name on a defaulted loan application. He was looking at the father-in-law he had worshipped. And for the first time in 10 years, I saw the fog lift from my son's eyes. He didn't look scared anymore. He looked like he wanted to kill someone. He started walking toward the stage. His steps were heavy. Richard backed away. Stay back, Brandon. This old fool is lying. Brandon climbed the stairs. He didn't look at me. He walked straight to Richard. Did you do it? Brandon asked. Did you use Mia? Richard tried to laugh. It is complicated, Brandon. It is finance, you wouldn't understand. Brandon punched him. It wasn't a graceful punch. It was a clumsy, desperate haymaker. But it connected. It hit Richard square in the jaw. Richard stumbled back, tripping over the microphone cord. He fell heavily onto the stage, his crystal glass shattering his pristine tuxedo stained with scotch. The crowd erupted. It was chaos. People were shouting. Flashbulbs were exploding. I stood there amidst the madness. I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm I had summoned was raging around me, but I was the eye. I was the center. I looked down at Richard. He was trying to crawl away. His wig had slipped slightly. He looked pathetic. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small USB drive. I held it up. "This is the copy I said to the room. The original is with the FBI. They received it an hour ago." Richard stopped crawling. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide, filled with the realization that there was no way out. No lawyer could fix this. No bribe could cover this. "Why," he whispered, "why did you wait? Why didn't you just turn it in?" I leaned down close to his ear. "Because I wanted you to feel it, Richard. I wanted you to feel what it is like to lose everything in front of everyone. I wanted you to know that the man you called a senile old fool is the man who just ended your life." Then the doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. Uniformed officers poured in. Behind them were agents in windbreakers with those 3 letters printed on the back. FBI. The crowd scrambled out of the way. The illusion of high society shattered completely, leaving only the ugly reality of crime and punishment. Vanessa tried to run toward the side exit, but 2 female officers intercepted her. She started screaming, kicking her heels against the floor, a tantrum of a spoiled child facing consequences for the first time. Cynthia was weeping into her napkin while an officer read her rights. And Richard. Richard just lay there on the stage. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the chandelier. I watched as they hauled him up. I watched as they cuffed his hands behind his back. The metal clicked shut. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Brandon stood next to me. He was shaking. His hand was bleeding where he had hit Richard. "Dad," he said, his voice broken. I didn't look at him. Not yet. I watched them march Richard down the stairs. I watched the paparazzi swarm him. I watched the flashbulbs illuminate his shame. "It is over, Brandon," I said. "The lie is over." I turned and walked to the edge of the stage. I looked out at the empty table 42 where my cold dinner still sat. I was hungry, but for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't hungry for justice. I was just hungry for a sandwich. I walked down the stairs. The police were waiting for me, but not to arrest me. A detective stepped forward. "Mr. King," he said respectfully, "we need a statement." I nodded. "I will give you a statement, detective, but first I need to go see my granddaughter. I promised her I would find my marbles." And as I walked out of that ballroom, leaving the wreckage of the Caldwell Empire behind me, I reached into my pocket and touched the empty space where the watch used to be. I didn't need the watch anymore. I knew what time it was. It was time to go home. The applause was gone. The music had died. The only sounds left in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza were the heavy tread of federal boots and the hysterical sobbing of the woman who had once called herself the Queen of Boston society. I stood near the edge of the stage watching the tableau dismantle. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The structural integrity of the Caldwell Empire had been based on fear and lies, and now that the foundation was gone, gravity was doing the rest. Agents in windbreakers moved with practiced efficiency. They did not care about the silk tablecloths or the crystal centerpieces. They overturned chairs. They secured the perimeter. They treated the frantic guests not as VIPs, but as potential witnesses or accomplices. The illusion of untouchability that Richard had spent 40 years cultivating evaporated in 40 seconds. I watched 2 agents hoist Richard off the floor. He was a mess. His lip was bleeding from Brandon's punch. His midnight blue tuxedo was stained with spilled scotch and dust. His wig sat askew on his head, revealing the sparse gray scalp beneath. He looked small. He looked old. He looked exactly like what he was, a thief who had finally run out of runway. He was not going quietly. As the officer twisted his arms behind his back, Richard began to scream. It was a guttural, animalistic sound. It was her, he shrieked, spitting blood onto the polished floor. It was Vanessa. She cooked the books. She set up the shell companies. I am just the figurehead. I didn't know the details. Check the signatures. They are all hers. He was doing exactly what I predicted. He was offering up his own daughter-in-law as a sacrifice to save his skin. Across the stage, Vanessa was being cornered by two female agents. She heard him. She stopped struggling for a moment and stared at the man she had conspired with for a decade. Her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You lying snake," she screamed back, her voice shredding the air. "You threatened me. You told me if I didn't fix the ledgers, you would have me disbarred. You took the money, Richard. You bought the boat. You bought the villa. I have the emails. I have the recordings." She turned to the agents, holding out her hands, as if begging for a pen, not handcuffs. "I want to cut a deal. I will testify. I know where the rest of it is. He has a storage unit in New Hampshire. Gold bars. Cash. I can take you there. Just get me a deal." Richard lunged at her, but the agents held him back. "You ungrateful leech," he roared. "I pulled you out of the gutter. I gave you a life." It was ugly. It was grotesque. It was perfect. The high society veneer had peeled away completely, leaving only the raw, desperate instinct of survival. They were eating each other alive, and the FBI agents were just there to record the meal. Cynthia was the third domino to fall. She wasn't fighting. She was sitting on the floor in her $10,000 gown, weeping into her hands. An officer was reading her rights, but she wasn't listening. "My Gala," she sobbed. "My beautiful Gala. Everyone is watching. What will the committee think?" She didn't care about the theft. She didn't care about the orphans. She didn't even care that her husband was bleeding. She cared that her party was ruined. It was a level of narcissism that was almost impressive in its purity. And then there was Brandon. My son stood alone in the middle of the chaos. The guests had backed away from him, leaving a wide circle of empty space. He was breathing hard. His right hand, the one that had delivered the blow, was trembling violently. He stared at Richard as the agents marched the old man down the stairs. Richard passed right by him. He stopped for a second. He looked at Brandon not with anger, but with a sneer of absolute contempt. "You are weak, Brandon," Richard spat. "You were always weak. That is why I used you. That is why I used your daughter, because I knew you didn't have the guts to stop me." The agent shoved Richard forward, forcing him toward the exit. But the words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Brandon didn't move. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a 10-year coma to find his world was ash. I walked down the stairs. I moved slowly. The adrenaline was fading, and my knee was starting to ache, but I forced myself to walk tall. I navigated through the overturned chairs and the shocked whispers of the crowd. I walked straight to my son. He saw me coming. He looked at me with eyes that were red and wet. He looked at his hand, then he looked at me again. He looked like the little boy who used to come to me when he had broken a window, waiting for the punishment. "Dad," he whispered. His voice was broken. I stopped 2 feet away from him. I didn't hug him. I didn't yell. I just looked at him with the cold clarity of a forensic auditor. "Dad." "I didn't know," he said. Tears spilled over his cheeks. "I swear to you, I knew they were aggressive. I knew they cut corners. But Mia, stealing her identity. I didn't know. I believe you," I said. He let out a sob of relief. He took a step toward me, reaching out. But I didn't move. I stayed where I was. "I believe you didn't know, Brandon, because you chose not to know. You saw the cars. You saw the vacations. You saw the way they treated me. You saw the way Vanessa looked at you with contempt. And you closed your eyes. You closed your eyes because the bed was soft, and the wine was expensive. Brandon flinched, as if I had hit him. "I punched him, Dad," he pleaded. "I knocked him down." "Yes," I said. "You punched him. After the world saw the truth. After it was safe. After you had no other choice." I looked around the room at the wreckage of the party. "A punch doesn't fix 10 years of silence, Brandon. A punch doesn't give me back my wife. A punch doesn't give Mia back her credit score. Dad, please. What do I do? I have lost everything. They are going to seize the house. Vanessa is going to prison. I have nothing." "You have hands," I said, pointing to his trembling fists. "You have a brain. You are 40 years old. Figure it out." I turned away from him. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every instinct in my fatherly heart wanted to comfort him, to tell him we would fix it. But I couldn't. Comfort had been his poison. Comfort had made him weak. If he was ever going to be a man, he needed to stand in the cold without a coat. Dad Brandon called out behind me. "Where are you going?" I stopped, but I didn't look back. "I am going to get a sandwich," I said. "And then I am going to see my granddaughter." I walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for me. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I wasn't the senile old man anymore. I wasn't the poor relation. I was the man who had brought down the giants. As I reached the double doors, a detective stepped into my path. He was a young man with sharp eyes. He looked at my tuxedo, then at my face. "Mr. King," he said, holding out a card. "We will need you to come in tomorrow, to formalize the statement, and to authenticate the drive." I took the card. "I will be there, Detective. 9 a.m. sharp. I am usually an early riser." He nodded respectfully. "Nice work tonight, sir. I have been trying to pin something on Caldwell for 5 years. I never thought to check the teddy bear." I smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was genuine. Nobody ever suspects the toy detective. That is the tragedy of it. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the Boston night. The air was crisp and cold. The rain had stopped. The flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers painted the street in a chaotic rhythm. I watched as they loaded Richard into the back of a van. He looked out the window one last time. Our eyes met. He looked terrified. I looked bored. The van pulled away, sirens wailing, fading into the distance. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed Patty. "It is done," I said. "I know," she replied. "I saw it on the news. It was Biblical Wallace." "Is Leo okay?" "He is fine. He wiped the logs. No trace back to us." "Good." Wallace, Patty said, her voice soft. "How is Brandon?" I looked back at the hotel entrance. I could see my son sitting on the steps, his head in his hands, alone in the spotlight. "He is where he needs to be," I said. "At rock bottom. It is the only place you can build a solid foundation." I hung up. I signaled a taxi. Where to, the driver asked as I climbed in. I gave him the address of a 24-hour diner near my apartment. The one that served stale coffee and excellent grilled cheese. "And turn off the radio," I added. "I have had enough drama for one lifetime. I just want some quiet." The taxi pulled away, leaving the scandal behind. I leaned back against the worn vinyl seat and closed my eyes. For the first time in 10 years, the ticking clock in my head had stopped. The books were balanced. The ledger was closed. I was free. 3 months have passed since the night the lights went out on the Caldwell Empire. The Boston winter has finally retreated, leaving behind a spring that feels cleaner and brighter than any I can remember. I am sitting on a park bench overlooking the Charles River. The cherry blossoms are blooming, painting the world in shades of soft pink and white. It is a stark contrast to the gray prison walls that now house my in-laws. The legal proceedings were swift and brutal. When the FBI has a military-grade solid-state drive filled with a decade of detailed ledgers, trials tend to be short. Richard tried to fight at first. He hired a team of expensive lawyers using money he had stashed in a secret account we hadn't found yet. But the judge was not impressed, especially when the prosecution played the video of Richard mocking the court during a recess thinking the microphones were off. Richard Caldwell was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. At 70 years old, it is effectively a life sentence. The man who spent his life accumulating houses he never lived in now lives in a 6x8 cell. I heard from a guard that he spends his days writing letters to the governor, letters that are never mailed, demanding a retrial because of a conspiracy against him. He still cannot accept that he lost to a teddy bear. Cynthia fared no better. She tried the ignorant spouse defense, weeping on the stand about how she was just a simple housewife who signed what she was told. But the emails proved otherwise. She was the one who suggested using the orphan charity as a front because nobody audits orphans. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. She received 15 years. Her assets were seized, including the alpaca coat and the diamond collection. The last I heard, she was working in the prison laundry, complaining that the detergent was ruining her hands. Vanessa was the only one who got a deal. She testified against Richard and Cynthia, providing the locations of the hidden gold in New Hampshire. In exchange, her sentence was reduced to 8 years. She screamed when the judge read the verdict. She thought she would walk free. She didn't understand that betrayal is a currency that devalues quickly. She is in a medium security facility now. Brandon filed for divorce the day after her sentencing. And Brandon, my son, he is not in prison. He was not charged thanks to his genuine ignorance and my testimony on his behalf. But he is serving his own kind of sentence. He lost the house. He lost the cars. He lost the social circle that only tolerated him because of his wife's money. He lives in a small apartment in Dorchester now, not far from where I used to live. He works as a manager at a hardware store. It is honest work, hard work. I visited him last week. His hands were rough, and he looked tired, but for the first time in his life he looked like a man. He makes dinner for Mia every night. He helps her with her homework. He is learning to be a father without a checkbook. It is a slow process, but he is trying, and that is all I ever wanted. As for Mia, she is sitting on the grass in front of me reading a book. She is wearing jeans and a t-shirt, not the uncomfortable silk dresses Cynthia used to force her into. Her credit report is clean. The court expunged the fraudulent debts, and the settlement from the Caldwell estate forfeiture has been placed in a blind trust for her education. She is safe. She laughs louder now. She doesn't look over her shoulder waiting to be criticized. And me. I didn't take the job offer from the FBI. They asked me to come on as a consultant to teach their young agents how to spot the spaces between the numbers. It was tempting, but I declined. I have chased enough ghosts. I have balanced enough books. I used the reward money, the whistleblower percentage that the government mandates, to buy a small cottage on the coast of Maine. It has a porch that faces the ocean. It has a garden where I plan to grow tomatoes just like Martha used to. I am not lonely. I have my books. I have my weekends with Mia. And I have the peace of mind that comes from knowing the ledger is balanced. People often ask me if I regret what I did. They ask if it was hard to send my own family to prison. They ask if I feel guilty about destroying the legacy of the Caldwell name. I tell them that legacy is not built on stone or gold. It is built on truth. A legacy built on lies is just a sandcastle waiting for the tide. I didn't destroy their family. I saved mine. I saved Mia from growing up thinking that money is worth more than integrity. I saved Brandon from living his entire life as a puppet. And I saved myself from dying as a victim. I look at the watch on my wrist. It is not the gold Patek Philippe. That watch is gone, melted down by a greedy man. This is a simple watch, a Timex. It cost me $30, but it keeps perfect time. And every time I look at it, I am reminded that time is the one thing we cannot steal and we cannot buy. We can only spend it. I stand up and stretch. My knees still ache when it rains, but today the sun is warm. Mia, I call out. Time to go, sweet pea. I promised you ice cream. She looks up and smiles. That same smile that gave me the courage to jump into a dumpster at 3 a.m. Coming, Grandpa, she yells. She runs to me and takes my hand. Her hand is small and warm. We walk together out of the park, leaving the shadows behind us. The world is full of people like Richard and Vanessa. People who think they are untouchable. People who think they can step on the weak to reach the top. But they forget one thing. They forget that the ground they stand on is held together by the people they trample. And sooner or later, the ground will shake. My name is Wallace King. I am 71 years old. I am a grandfather. I am an accountant. And I am the man who proved that you are never too old to fight back. If you are listening to this and you feel small, if you feel like someone has taken your voice or your dignity, remember my story. Remember the teddy bear. Remember that the truth is a patient hunter. It doesn't need to shout. It just needs to wait. And when the moment comes when the arrogance of your enemy blinds them, you step into the light and you tell them exactly what time it is. Thank you for listening. This is Wallace signing off. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like and share it with someone who needs a reminder that justice still exists. And tell me in the comments what you would have done if you found that watch. Until next time, stay sharp and keep your eyes on the numbers.